attending today. My name is Kelsey Leos. I am a manager in the Office of Information Technology at UC Irvine. One of the primary areas I focus on is the management of our learning management systems at UCI, which are currently in a state of transition.
And my name is Ray Vadnais. I'm a user experience architect. I work for Kelsey, primarily on our learning management systems as well as some of our student success initiatives.
So this presentation was also given at UCC-SC in Santa Cruz last year, as well as at EDUCAUSE in Anaheim. There have been a few tweaks, but you might see some mentions of EDUCAUSE and or UCC-SC. We'll also include a link in this that points to a page we put up for EDUCAUSE where you can get a lot of the assets that we talk about in this presentation, including Google Spreadsheets and documents that you might find useful as you do your own communications planning. So here's a quick look at the agenda. I won't spend a lot of time going over an agenda slide. Suffice it to say that our goal here today is to give you an overview of how we've handled IT change communication around a pretty disruptive and challenging campus change, which is ongoing. This was something that was very new for our team, a very large project, and so we took a lot of time to really think through carefully how we would go through and present this information to the campus. So for some very, very brief introductory context, I've mentioned that we are making a learning management system transition. The communication strategy that we're going to talk about today was associated with the pilot project for trying out Canvas on our campus. This is a challenging project because our current homegrown learning management system is generally well accepted and well liked. There are exceptions. There are folks who are eager to move away from it. But by and large, when we tell people that we're making that movement, the reaction is, why are you taking away something that works? So we knew that we needed to be very thoughtful in how we communicated throughout this project. The title of this presentation is a reference to a parable about change from the management book, Who Moved My Cheese, which some of you may have heard of. I think was really popular in, gosh, late 90s, early 2000s, I think is when I first heard about this. So this is a book that our associate director took a lot of lessons from as she was working with us to kick this off and approach this in a rational way. Some of the principles that come out of this book include that change is inherently disruptive and difficult, that not everyone is going to make it through that change easily, that we have a responsibility to help them through that change, and that whatever kind of change we are putting in front of people, we have an opportunity to really help them along the way, to make it clear and understandable, and help them navigate that impact rather than just enforcing something and kind of expecting them to find their way through. We know that there's going to be a population of users for whom this change is especially difficult. We know that we're going to encounter resistance, fear, uncertainty, and we recognize there are legitimate reasons for that. That's not something where we just have to overcome humans. That's something where people have real reasons to be concerned and to be stressed out. So we want to be proactive in communicating around it and have a solid, thoughtful, and project-length communication strategy that we can work from. So why should we care about having a really comprehensive communication strategy with a change project like this? First and foremost, you can build acceptance. With good communication, you can potentially have good initial acceptance, potentially have champions, people who are going to be a little bit more forgiving when things get bumpy, if you acknowledge up front that you know that they're going to encounter some challenges. And you can get buy-in. You can potentially identify some champions, people who can be kind of won over to support this change and to help communicate this change. Ideally, people who are outside your IT world, people who are colleagues with the instructors, students, and staff who are most affected, because they may be in a better position to really help explain things in language that will work for their peers. Ultimately, it's the right thing to do. We know our project is going to create anxiety. We know that we cannot prevent that completely, so we have a duty to use a good communication strategy to help manage that anxiety, to help make this as undisruptive as possible for our campus. By the end of this session, we hope to leave you with the takeaways on the slide, understanding how to identify the people to whom you should be communicating, understanding what questions to ask about your audiences so that you can craft communication that is effective for them, and to give you an idea of the variety of different communication channels that you might consider for an outreach project for a change of this nature. The lessons learned that we're going to share with you come from our real-world implementation. Even with a good plan, things will get missed, mistakes will be made. Towards the end of this presentation, we have a few updates that reflect some of the lessons that we've learned since giving this presentation previously, within the last year, even as our pilot concluded and our transition continued. All right, so this is essentially a case study of our LMS transition. We have a small on-campus development team with a generally well-liked homegrown learning management system, but it's aging, and we recognize that it's not sustainable. So we needed to think carefully about how we could do this so that it would be not more disruptive than it has to be, so that it would meet both the instructional use cases that we traditionally think about with an LMS and the non-instructional cases that people have become accustomed to meeting through our systems because that capacity was there. And we need to think about how this will really serve our faculty, students, and staff. So we used the same approach throughout the one-year pilot of the vendor system. And as we have moved into our multi-year transition project after validating that moving to campus makes the most sense for our campus. We knew that this would be controversial. We knew it would be a poorly understood change, and there'd be a lot of resistance. We expected, and we were right to expect, a lot of comments along the lines of, it works, why are you changing it? I need this to get my work done. And there goes IT changing stuff on us again. And I think we've all probably been on both sides of that experience where we've had something that was good enough. I tend to think of a calendaring system I used that was admittedly clunky, but change to that system was disruptive to me because it did what I needed, even though I understood there were a lot of reasons behind changing it. So we really wanted to be transparent. As much as possible, we wanted to be able to give the campus a unified, clear, consistent, and complete message. We have a lot of goodwill that we built with our campus community through engaging with them as we developed the homegrown system, and we didn't want to lose that. It was very important to us that we still have a home-based team who's managing this system and available. Our goal at the end of this was for the campus to continue to trust us when this project was over, to continue to engage with us and talk with us, because we can't do this project right if people stop speaking with us, stop sharing information, and stop telling us about the good, the bad, the ugly, or whatever else they're experiencing. We pulled together a communication team for this. It was important to have multiple people involved with the right roles. It's particularly right skill set, people who will be present through the whole project lifecycle, able to monitor, learn from it as it goes along, and update this plan. Very helpful to have people who enjoy writing and who are good at writing effectively. Also helpful to have at least one person who doesn't mind public speaking and can get out there in front of your audience in person. And you got to have some empathy to be able to put yourself in the user's shoes and really honestly reckon with the difficulty that we know we are causing them, while recognizing that those shoes vary from population to population, and we have a diverse user base that is in no way uniform. It's also very helpful to have people who already know and work with the impacted users. So people who have those positive relationships to begin with and have nuanced understanding of the campus user base. In our case, our communications team comprised the project initiator and champion, the team manager, which is myself, and the user experience lead, which is Ray. Each of us brought various elements of these skills into the mix. At this point, I'll hand over to Ray, who will start talking about how we actually initiated the communications planning.
So one of the things that we determined was really important right when we started this, when Brandy and I started our initial planning, was kind of getting ahead of the message and starting to talk to people and figure out who we should talk to even before we started planning the actual strategy, which I'll get into in a minute. There are some reasons for this. It takes time to get on people's calendars. It takes time to think of all this stuff. We use this opportunity to do some of our initial stakeholder brainstorming, figure out who's going to be impacted, identify people who we know are going to be upset by this sort of massive change in our learning management system. By people who we've had those positive interactions with in the past that we could turn into champions early on. So right when we started our communications with the campus, these people would already be on our side and could help us to make that message even more effective. One of the other questions that we asked ourselves was, who might call our CIO? So who might call them, and then go out and we can kind of proactively address some of their concerns. The focus was on why is this change coming? Why are we doing this? Or why is the campus opting to do this project, and kind of letting them get some of their thoughts out early. So, in order to do that, we explained why the change was necessary, including a lot of reasons in our case for the purposes of our learning management system. Our system was old. I started working on it when I was hired in 2004, and it had already been around for 4 years at that point. So it is an aging system, aging code base. Some of the frameworks we use were at the end of life, but it worked really well for our campus. We had built it for the campus, so we had a difficult time, or a challenging time, actually explaining why we were opting to make this change. We wanted to demonstrate that care and thought went into the decision. There was a lot of involvement with committees and faculty members, broad range of the campus all went into it, as well as taking steps that were necessary to evaluate alternative systems. So it didn't just look like, we had our homegrown system, now we have this new vendor system, and this is the way it will be. We were able to actually explain all the work and all the thought and all the effort that went into actually investigating these various alternatives. So in our case, we had a couple of committees with cross-functional staff and faculty that helped to inform these decisions. And those committees also had their own set of communications, websites, emails, stuff like that went out. We were also really honest up front that change will have an impact, that this won't be the easiest change. People have to learn a new system, they'll have to change existing processes, and it might be painful. We acknowledged that really early. We didn't try to sugarcoat it. We were as honest as we could possibly be with people that we know this will be frustrating. But that we will have support in place to help them through this change, that we'll have people available, documentation available, all that kind of stuff. And the communications project was also to ensure people and kind of instill that confidence in them. And in our case, we also already had some of that trust built up. We had a lot of support and training for our existing learning management system, so we had that reputation for standing behind our product. Some of the pros and cons of this kind of pre-strategy strategy, it helps us to promote the inclusiveness and transparency. I've kind of gone over all of this, identify the champions, figure out some of those early concerns that we could more intelligently address them later on. The biggest con is probably when you're trying to get on people's calendars and getting in scheduling and playing telephone with people back and forth. Also, if you talk to somebody, they talk to somebody, they talk to somebody, your message will kind of morph a bit. So that was some interesting learning experiences. And that'll happen with any communication strategy. So it's just something you want to be aware of is you'll tell somebody something, they'll tell somebody something slightly different, and by the time it gets that 10th person, it could be the exact opposite of what you told the first person.
And as Ray has hinted, there's really no way to avoid that. So we kind of viewed it as trying to inoculate against that a bit and build some herd immunity, so to speak, by getting the message out enough that there wouldn't be quite as much of an opportunity for the wrong message to get out and circulate before people were hearing from us.
Yeah. So now I'll actually go into our 7-step process for how we developed our comprehensive communication strategy. This is based off of a technique for fundraising communications for nonprofits that our associate director found. It's a heavily modified version of that. If anybody's interested, you can let us know, and I'll go back to her and find out exactly what that source was. We use that as a starting point, and then just kind of morphed it into what we needed for our campus. And again, you can use anything we're talking about today is the same thing. Consider this a starting point. It worked for us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the exact same process will work for you. But the kind of guiding principles and the general flow that we did seemed like they were pretty successful. This is our process. We had basically 2 main steps, defining the goals of the communication strategy, and then discovering and defining the audiences that we needed to reach out to and interact with. I'll be going into each of these in more detail, so I won't actually read all the slides. Again, these are used as guiding principles, and so move on. This is how we did our work, and it worked really well. So it was the 3 of us. Sometimes it was just Brandy and I early on, then we brought Kelsey in after the first few meetings. Brandy and I worked in what she called a 10-20-10-20 active working meeting, where we would meet up for 10 minutes to review and plan the next 50 minutes. Then the 2 of us would go off and do something individually for 20 minutes, come back together for 10 minutes to collaborate, separate again for 20 minutes, and then spend a couple minutes planning our next meeting and putting that in the calendar invite so we actually knew what was going on when we met up again. We did these meetings twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, and having that plan in our meeting invite was really useful. We also use a lot of collaborative software. We're big fans of Google Spreadsheets, and that was really useful. The 10-20-10-20 split will make more sense as I get into the actual tasks that we were working on. So the first thing we did was come up with our goals. These goals were kind of again, our guiding principles for everything that we did had to meet one of these goals. We would refer back to these goals constantly and question everything that we were doing and make sure that they actually met one of these goals. There are 5 examples that were from this project, the LMS transition. One of the biggest ones is that last one, reducing fear and misunderstanding, but they're all equally important. So the first task we did after we came up with those goals was to brainstorm our audience list. This was pretty much coming up with anybody and everybody that we thought might be impacted or might be interested in this change. Figuring out the who and the why of these audiences. So the way that we did this, again, is we went away for 20 minutes and we just made a massive list of people. Each of us did it separately. We didn't see what the other person was doing for that 20 minutes, so we wouldn't be kind of inflicting our biases on the other person. I think we each came up with like 50 or 60 different audiences. We were really granular. We figured, as we do a refinement, which comes in the step also a little bit later, we can kind of combine audiences like that. So we went away, came up with our own list, and then we merged them all together, removing all the duplicates because we didn't want to have to deal with that. And again, having multiple people do it helps you get the different perspectives. So I did this with Brandy, and she's our associate director. So she's, in management, she has that kind of more senior management type perspective, whereas I have the user experience focus since I'm dealing with our users and going out and talking one-on-one to our faculty and students, things like that. So we both had very different perspectives on this, which helped us to have a really interesting set of audiences that we wanted to reach out to. By the time we were done merging them together, we ended up with about 70 groups, and then we merged them again later and ended up with about half of that. And again, it's better to have people you remove than to not include somebody who should have been included, which is why I think when we did our undergraduate student audience, it was like 6 or 7 different audiences, like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, transferred student, international student. We were really detailed, and then we combined together later on. Part of the audience list also is refining all of your audiences. We did our big brainstorming, and then we refined them, came up with how important each audience is, how effective or ineffective our existing communication had been with them, and what their perspective on the project might be with the categories that are on the screen. We also ranked them in terms of their criticality to the project success. So 1 is incredibly critical, and 5 is they're going to be impacted. Just make sure that they're aware of what's going on. There were some audiences that actually didn't get a ranking, and that's how you can kind of tell that maybe this audience doesn't belong on your list. So if you determine that they are not at all important to this project, then they wouldn't get a ranking. We could just kind of prune them off the list. So after we went through and did all of that work, we started giving more details to those audiences. Again, we gave more thought to effectiveness and perspective on the project, and more thinking to the ranking. So that first one was kind of an initial draft, and then we went in and actually gave it a lot more detail. And then we started grouping. So we created affinity groups. You can kind of see here on the right, there's a few sample audiences. So undergraduate students, graduate students, and first generation students. And then we grouped them together. So they went into a learners group, and then further subdivided into general audience and targeted needs. And so we took all of our 70, probably 60 by this point, audiences and started kind of combining them down into these audiences that might have similar needs. This also helps you to identify audiences that ended up being almost identical, that didn't need to be separate, so you can do some of the combining and pruning at this point as well. And then we started refining and defining. So we went through each of those audiences in that same 10-20-10-20 working pattern. We thought about why the audiences are important, what we want from them, and how we should be communicating with those audiences. So in some cases, for the how, it's like email, phone, in-person, one-on-one, big group meetings, anything that we could think of. The what we want from the audience, we basically would say, like, we want them to be champions for it, we want them to accept it, we want them to not complain about it in some cases, things like that. And then just some tips. If you think of new audiences while you're doing this, which you will, just add them. Don't stress out that you forgot them earlier, just put them on this list. If you find more similarities, just keep grouping. This is a very iterative process, and these steps are presented as distinct steps, but they really all kind of run together as you're going through this river of communication. And our spreadsheets ended up getting really, really long, so we started making a liberal use of that hide column feature. If you don't need to see it, or if it's distracting, just hide it. You can always unhide it later. And then again, on our spreadsheet, we created some new columns, which whenever I mention output in columns, we have assets on a website that I'll share just after this section, and they have samples of all of this work on those as well. And then we do more combining and more refining. So we think about if the audience is still important, if they're categorized appropriately, and our goal here was to kind of get down to what we could actually, groupings of audiences we could actually reach out to. So creating that manageable focused list of audiences, so that we clearly can't go out and talk to 80 completely different sets of people with our small team. But once we kind of created this focused list, then it started turning into something we could actually manage and identified opportunities for outreach. Some tips here: you can delete things or move audiences away. We tried to actually not delete as much as possible. A lot of our spreadsheets ended up with like another tab, which was, this was stuff that we took off. We wanted to keep it just in case. And it all just lived in Google Sheets and eventually got probably deleted way later on. Again, we kept doing more merging. We also tried to make sure that whenever we came together in those 10-minute sections of the meeting, that we always came to a consensus. If one person didn't agree with something, by the end of the 10 minutes, they would agree, or we would add on additional things, make some clarifications, things like that. That's especially important when you're removing entries. You want everybody to agree when you're going to remove somebody. Because if one person wants to keep them on, there's probably a good reason for it. And then we moved into working out our communication methods and concerns. Excuse me. So we went through each audience and we identified the key concerns for the audience with regard to the change. So this again is just more brainstorming, and we're having people from different areas of the organization is useful for helping to figure out exactly the different concerns that these audiences might have. And again, figuring out the best ways to reach this audience and how frequently they should be engaged. So some people you want to be constantly reaching out to and providing updates for, like your immediate manager. Some people you may just want to remind quarterly. So one of our outputs, for example, was a quarterly campus-wide email. We couldn't send campus-wide emails every week, or people would stop reading what we were writing, and they probably wouldn't let us do that anyways. But a quarterly one we found to be a really effective way of communicating. And a lot of this work, since you're digging through spreadsheets, and this tip actually goes with all of these steps, it can get really tedious. You're staring at spreadsheets, you're doing a lot of typing the same thing, so don't do it all at once. Spread your meetings out, leave a day in between, work on something else, come back to it. Otherwise, you'll just, by the time you get to the bottom of the list, you're going to not be doing necessarily as good a job as you did at the top of the list. So by the end of this phase, you should know your probable concerns for your audiences and how you want to actually reach out and communicate with them. And one more thing to add for the communications mechanisms, you'll probably end up with multiple channels for an audience, like one-on-one meetings and emails, for example. And that's okay. It just means that your message is more likely to get through to them. And then again, just kind of figuring out a little bit more about the frequency. This is where you start getting into a little bit more fine-grained detail. If you have multiple communication methods, you're going to have different frequency of communicating via each of them. So that one-on-one meeting might be quarterly, the email could be weekly, for example. And again, it can get tedious. Don't do it all at once. By the end of this, we took all of these steps and turned it into the whole enchilada. We had a couple gigantic spreadsheets. The one that is presented in teeny tiny writing on the right-hand side was one of our timeline-based master spreadsheets. In the middle, we have the phases of the project. On the left side, we have the major audience groupings under the administrative category. And on the right side, we have the major audience groupings under the academic side. So, instructors, students, things like that. This was really useful later, especially when we don't remember why an audience was listed. Every once in a while, we would look at the list and be like, why is this random group on here? And we were able to look at this and be like, oh, it's because they're an important administrative group that we have to reach out to once every quarter, stuff like that. And then all of this can get turned into an actionable form, such as a quarterly calendar, which is actually the main way that we executed the strategy that we came up with. Everything that I just went through, since I know that it's kind of hard to visualize, since it all goes back to spreadsheets that were far too wide to put on a slide. All of this is on this WordPress site, sites.uci.edu/e16uci/cheese. A copy of this presentation deck is on there. It's actually a slightly older version that we gave at EduCause last year. We also have blank templates that are all Google spreadsheets. You can copy them into your own Google Drive or download them as Excel. And there's an outline template of the plan that we had in the previous slides that we actually are working on a new communication strategy. And we took that plan and all of these templates, and we're using that as the basis for that work. We started on that like yesterday. So it is still accurate because we're actively using it right now.
Yes.
I'm going to hand it off to Kelsey. She'll actually talk about the execution of our communication strategy.
So when we say execution, we mean taking all of this planning activity, all of this months-long brainstorming activity, list making, and turning out the real communication assets, emails, websites, postcards, all the good stuff that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. I was the lead for this because I managed the day-to-day operations of the LMS team, and I managed staff who had the skill sets that we needed to pull this all together. And I was overseeing really day-to-day what we were getting done, as well as all the work that the team was committed to, so I had the best sense of the workload and kind of the flow of communications with our end users and the information that's coming in that might change this plan as we learned more. One thing that we found just absolutely invaluable was good old-fashioned pen and paper. We took those big, sticky tablet paper things and stuck them on the wall, made them into monthly calendars, and we actually held a daily check-in where we would take a look at this calendar, think about where we were, list the things on Post-it notes that we planned to do, and then as we completed those activities, we'd pull them off, write down what really happened, and we'd cross out the completed days. We kept a photo of every one of these calendars, so we can actually refer back to now almost 2 years worth of communication activity and get a sense of, okay, what were we doing this time last year, and how did that work, and kind of keep track of the overall volume and frequency. We started out with a color coding system, and we lost track of that pretty quickly, but it still became really valuable to have this record. This helped me to pull together a lot of reports for our leadership layer on how we were doing outreach. It helped me make sure that I wasn't seeing kind of a drop-off in a particular month, but was seeing a relatively steady volume of communication at the appropriate points of the quarter. And we were able to populate this, too, with important milestones. So week of academic quarters, things like grades deadlines, or timelines that were important internally, such as when our team's development sprint started and ended. So this really helped us to keep on track, just really holding us to a high standard of daily check-ins and making sure that this was getting the time, the attention, and the focus that it needed. And I don't think we will ever go back from having these big, beautiful paper calendars on our walls after finding out just how helpful that was.
I also want to add that we intentionally did these as paper. We very briefly tried digital, and having these paper assets in our working space was really effective. Yeah. Having it digitally, it's a lot easier to kind of ignore, not see, and you get focused on the application rather than on the actual pieces of paper. Yeah,
there's something powerful about standing together by a wall and physically moving Post-its around, writing on this surface. It also was right in the suite where the whole development team worked, so it gave everybody visibility into what we were doing. Even if they weren't in those meetings, they could easily see what was going on and kind of when the next communication actions were coming up.
Though, one other thing that we found really useful with the paper calendars was putting the days that we would have, that we'd be on vacation on there. Yeah. So knowing that staff weren't actually going to be available to do tasks was also really useful. I think we found that out very quickly.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So we had a number of different communication mechanisms that we utilized. We have a lot of email, but of course everybody gets a lot of email, so there's some limits to the efficacy of that. We found that it was very helpful to have a high-level signature. So oftentimes our campus-wide messages would go out under our CIO's signature. That meant that we needed to plan some lead time in, so we would go so far as putting a note on that wall calendar a week out from when we wanted to send the thing, that was our deadline to have it in his hands for approval, if not sooner. We had targeted emails to specific populations as well. So we, for example, might have sent an email to instructors with really large classes of over 200 enrollment who have particular needs, or emails to particular programs that we know make certain kinds of usage of our tools that might indicate they have some specialized concerns we could address. We also conducted a lot of in-person events, including workshops. We did recurring workshops every quarter that were really how-to focused. They were training sessions in using Canvas. What you're seeing on the screen here is a one-sheet document that we would print and distribute so that participants could walk away from something. Sorry, this is not a one-sheet. This was actually a longer packet. They could walk away with something that really kind of gave them a cheat sheet, a quick reference guide to some of the most critical things that we know that they would need to reference later. And we did it as much for the practical effect of them having instructions later as we did for kind of a psychological effect of the reassurance of holding something in your hands that is your safety net that you can take away with you. The con of all of the in-person events was that it was hard to get attendance at these. Over the past 5 to 10 years, really, we've seen a decline in our in-person workshop attendance. Unfortunately, we haven't found good ways to remedy that, but we also haven't found other mechanisms of delivering this training to be as effective. So we continue to, and at the same time, even if we had really low attendance, holding these workshops did give us an opportunity to just continue to say, there are multiple different ways to learn about this. We'll meet you where you are. If you prefer in person, we've got it. If you prefer online documentation, we've got it. If you want to meet one-on-one, we'll do that. So it was part of just rounding out that strategy. Another in-person strategy that we employed was conducting instructor panels. And these were really successful in terms of both the attendance and the content and the impact that they had. I would speak very briefly at the beginning of a panel to give a quick update, what's happening, why is it happening, and how's it going so far, and then I would get out of the way and turn the microphone over to on-the-ground instructional staff, typically faculty members, also lecturers, and occasionally we had some teaching assistants in the mix as well, because they're the people who are able to talk to their colleagues and say, this is my actual lived experience, not what somebody in IT is trying to tell you. We made a point of meeting with our panelists ahead of time to really strongly encourage them to share everything, good, bad, or don't even know, but just kind of feel like saying it. We really wanted to make sure they knew that we were not trying to set up a marketing pitch. We were not trying to censor or constrain them in any way. It was incredibly important that they talked about the problems just as much as they talked about the advantages. It builds a lot of trust when you are not trying to cover up any of your challenges or roadblocks. You're really openly and very deliberately getting that information out there so people are ready for those challenges and they know that you're listening. Again, we just found these to be incredibly successful. They really helped us to build relationships with teachers as well, to recognize their hard work, write them nice thank you letters, and just continue to have ongoing conversations with them in no small part because we brought them into these events. We also found postcards to be fun, and I'll hand back to Ray to talk a little bit more about putting it together.
Yeah, so our assistant director went to a conference where they had talked about sending out postcards for one of their projects, and she found that to be a really interesting and effective way of communicating information to the campus, so we did the same thing. These are the first postcards that we sent to announce the adoption of Canvas. Actually, I think it's the second set that we sent to the campus. We found the postcards to be pretty effective and surprisingly affordable.
Yeah.
We found a local printing company that printed out like 2,500 of them for just over $100. If you ever need help printing postcards or tips, you can reach out to me. We actually found other people on campus who did postcards and asked them what they did. So in our case, our art department does these really beautiful mailers to the campus. I just emailed them and said, who do you use? And they told me. And again, these postcards are really effective. They're not that much effort to put together. The hardest part is getting everybody to agree on the content. And then we threw it together in a layout program and had it printed out. So this was really effective. And again, they went to all the eligible instructors. So we kind of looked at our audiences and said, who would be most impacted by these postcards? And we're like, these 1,200 or so instructors for this certain term are the ones that we want to get targeted outreach for. We still send these out every couple of quarters. Now we also use them to advertise our panel events and kind of encourage participation in those various events. Yeah,
I really want to emphasize how surprised we were by just how effective they were, and I don't think they're ever going to kind of leave our arsenal of communication tools at this point. We would send out a batch of postcards. We would be watching the statistics of Canvas usage, and we would see just an undeniable spike following the delivery of those cards. So it was something that the return on investment from these was fantastic. We were really pleased. We printed enough that we could carry stacks of them around to meetings as well and just give them away. So again, people walked away with something in their hands that had kind of distilled core information that they needed about what was going on.
We've also found that making them a little bit more generic than our early postcards are is effective because we ended up printing far too many at one point, and then we still have them, we still hand them out, and they're still really useful.
Yeah. So in addition to all of this outward-facing communication, we had a lot of internal communication to do as well. I provided biweekly updates to our director, monthly updates to CIO and assistant CIO, as well as a high-level academic officer who was important to all of this. The wall calendars made this easy to do. You can see these are a lot of updates to write over the course of a couple of years, but being able to just refer back to those calendars meant that I could very quickly compile a list of all the activity that we'd undertaken communication-wise. It also helped to keep us all on the same message. If someone went straight to the CIO, he would have something in hand. I would give him this content both inline in his email so he could just skim it and get what he needed, but also as an attached PDF that was shareable, that we made a point of making sure was shareable, so he had something he could print and take to a meeting even with short notice. And he had something that would give him kind of the key talking points around this project, because of course he's keeping track of so many things. This made it simpler for him to stay up to speed in the way that he needed to be. We also did, in addition to training sessions, we started doing really general information sessions, separate sessions for instructors, students, TAs, and instructor. Right, that's an extra mention, but you get the point, that were kind of tailored to their needs. They were poorly attended, unfortunately. There tended to be some misunderstanding of purpose, but the upshot of poor attendance is that if two people show up and what they want isn't what you were prepared to do, you can probably improvise. So there were some cases where I only had a couple people show, and they said, you know, what I was really here for was understanding how grading would work in Canvas. And I could say, well, okay, then let's look at the Canvas grades area, and let's not worry about what I came in prepared with, because we have that information and we'll meet your needs. We got really good feedback from those who did attend. We were able to just illustrate that there are multiple ways to learn about what's going on. Students were the hardest population, but we just felt it was important to respect that this is important to them as well, and to give them chances to come talk in person, you know, to have their needs really recognized and communicated to as much as possible.
We also did surveys several times a quarter. We went out and conducted surveys with all of our users. We did a pre-quarter survey, mid-quarter survey, and an end-of-quarter survey. This is all used to gather data in order to make the decision, but it also let us, you know, actively gather feedback from the campus, demonstrate that we are listening and we do care about what they say. We took all of these results and we put them together and posted them on our Canvas pilot info site, which we'll talk about in just a sec. The written feedback we also posted. The 6 or 10 or thousands and thousands and thousands of comments, and all that just got posted after we made sure that, you know, nobody gave away personalized or confidential information about themselves.
And I want to emphasize that was another way for us to truly be transparent. You know, some people took the time to share their deep dissatisfaction with this move, just as others shared their great enthusiasm. And we were not about trying to censor or hold anything back. We wanted all that information out there. So we made sure nobody violated campus policy in a serious way or, you know, identified themselves. And then we just published all of it. And it's still there. You can find all of this information on the pilot website, which I'll hand back to Ray to talk about a bit more.
We also used some of the survey results on postcards to let people know, you know, like 70% of the campus likes this new system. Make sure that you try it out and provide your feedback to us. So,
yeah.
And again, we had that project website, that pilot website, and it's still available. It's sites.uci.edu/canvaspilot. It's now presented as an archive, but we don't plan on taking it down. It has everything about our pilot, everything from the time we started until the time that the adoption was announced. All the assessment results, all the updates, known issues, everything is on that site. We found other universities that did something similar for their also similar pilot projects and transition projects, and found it really useful when they left their content up. So we're not planning on taking this down. This website was constantly evolving. We were always adding content to it, always modifying, you know, updating the homepage, making it look like it was an active, well-supported resource. We also posted video content on the homepage to kind of tell people, you know, why that, if you see on your screen, it says, why is UC doing a Canvas pilot? If you were to scroll down a bit, there's actually a video where we go through a presentation talking about why we're doing the pilot.
And videos of all of the panel events were posted here too. So if you couldn't come to a panel, you could come back here and you could see that information. That had an unexpected side benefit in that we were able to tell Instructure, the company that builds Canvas, you know, hey, you can see what our faculty are really saying. And, you know, sometimes it wasn't so nice, and we wanted them to see, you know, we are encouraging openness and honesty on our campus, and there are challenges. There are good things too, but this let them as an audience actually get a bit of a window into our transition process, and it helps somewhat with our management and vendor relationship.
We also took advantage of our existing course management system, that legacy system called EEE, It's one of the most heavily trafficked sites on our campus, and almost all instructors and students touch it, at least once a quarter, if not much more frequently. And our homepage was a really great area. At the bottom, you'll see these instructional spotlights, and we put anything about the Canvas pilot project got posted on there. This has been historically a really effective way for us to communicate, so we kept using it as an avenue for communication. That said, we did change it over time. So this is actually what it looks like today. So this is a couple of years after the last screenshot you saw. And now that we're in the midst of our transition, we posted this FAQ. And going back, I probably would have suggested we post something similar to this earlier on to kind of address why this is all going on, give people an idea of the whole process early on. But again, it's just to show that any content that you post, always constantly reevaluate it and look at it and say, is it still effective, or was it not effective at all? We just need to rapidly change it. We also found that keeping all of our text to be very conversational was really important. We tried to not sound like we were IT lecturing at people.
Or marketing.
We really tried incredibly hard to not sound like we were selling anything to our campus, presenting things in as neutral a way as possible, while still encouraging them to try things out and try this new system, tell us what you think about it.
One thing we kind of kept telling ourselves is we're not Canvas advocates, we're pilot advocates. And advocating a pilot means advocating, participating, sharing information, good, bad, or otherwise. It doesn't mean advocating for a particular outcome. So we really tried to keep that in mind throughout the pilot. Now, obviously, now that there is an outcome that has changed somewhat, and you may see some language that gets a little bit more marketing now, we're really trying to encourage and move people. But it was important for us to be mindful of that throughout.
And one of the things we constantly emphasized was that it was truly a pilot, and that it was not a decision that had been set in stone. It was something that we need to gather data about so we can present it to the appropriate people who would then ultimately make the decision.
There was a ton to learn. This was the first project of this scale and nature that really any of the three of us who were kind of leading these communication efforts, or the team members themselves, have been a part of in this way. So we have a lot of lessons that we've learned, and we're continuing to learn more every day, even right now. First and foremost, there is no such thing as too much or too early communication around a disruptive. No matter what, there are going to be people who feel like you didn't tell them, who tell you a year later, why are you springing this on me now? So we did everything we could to avoid that, everything we could think of, but we also had to accept that, that's going to happen. There are going to be people who are on sabbatical. There are going to be people who miss that email and postcard, and you just don't happen to be at the place where you are when you're trying to get that information out. So we tried to reflect on that and learn from that and add new communication mechanisms while accepting that perfection would be impossible. As we mentioned, the postcards were fantastic. That really taught us to just use every mechanism that we could think of, to think outside of our historical mechanisms, which were much more email and workshop based. One of the big lessons for me was around neglecting internal communications. As a manager, I had a tendency to forget what my immediate team did or did not know, and to not necessarily give them the same insight into what was happening that we were broadcasting outwards. It was very easy just to kind of assume people within the team knew what I knew because I was talking about it so often that it felt that way, but it wasn't true. So it was important that we included the internal team, the folks who were doing the work on the ground to support this project, in our communication planning, so that we were all on the same page, motivated, aware of what was coming next, and really feeling like they're in the loop on the whole project, as they certainly should be. We also learned to definitely take advantage of all the tools at our disposal. Those 2010 meetings have continued to be a strategy that we employ for all sorts of things, because they really help to focus, to create a productive use of time, keep people on task, and to really clearly delegate work while merging things back. So kind of fighting some of the downsides of brainstorming while getting the benefit of different perspectives and then reconciling that information together. And we needed to really deliberately build in our review and iteration process. It's easy when you're doing something for a long time to become a bit complacent, to think, I've got this, it's routine now. It was really important for us to try to counter that, to do things to remind ourselves, how recently did we update that site? Is it becoming stale or stagnant? Are we really in the phase of this project that we think we are? What are we doing to reality check that? Are our original goals still relevant? Are we coming up with communication that doesn't really align with them? And if so, does that signal a problem with the communication or the goals or both? So it's really important for us to do that, and that's something we've just actually been revisiting, of making sure that we have these checkpoints where we stop. We go back to square one, we review what we've got in front of us, or even set it aside and do some fresh brainstorming just to challenge ourselves to get away from our assumptions, and make sure that we're actually reviewing, learning, and changing, because the context around us is constantly changing. So there's no reason that any of the strategy would rationally be completely fixed, rather than evolving over time. Let's see, one other thing I'll mention is just keeping that calendar visible front and center. That had a big impact for us, and I highly recommend it. And making this something really collaborative but structured was definitely critical to making it successful. That is our very speedy overview, and that is my cat, because I've got you on a website, so I have an opportunity to tell the world that my cat is cute. So please observe my cat, know that he is cute. And now at this point, we'll start to take some questions. You're welcome to follow up with us after the fact. Our contact information is up on the screen, and we've got the URL again here for the materials posted publicly for EDUCAUSE. You can download overviews of all of this planning and the actual templates and spreadsheets. So we're not seeing any questions in the chat room, so feel free to chime in now if you've got any, either via chat, or you should, I believe, be unmuted at this point.
Hi, this is a couple folks listening in from the UC Pass Center in Riverside. First, just want to say thank you very much for sharing this information today. And this is the first we were hearing of the 2010-2010 approach. Could you talk a little bit more about why you came up with that approach and how it works?
Yeah, I can do that. So I don't actually know where Brandy found out about this working structure, but basically what we would do is we'd block off an hour of time, and then we would figure out what we needed to accomplish. Usually at the previous meeting, we talk about for a couple minutes at the very start. And like, let's say, for example, our goal for the meeting was to come up with our complete audience list. Then we would talk about that for a couple minutes, and we'd go to our separate offices and just go into a tab on a Google spreadsheet and start brainstorming the audiences. And
I'll make a quick note here. Before splitting apart, the people involved in this would say, okay, this is what we're going to do in the next 20 minutes. Yeah. Set a timer. Say, for 20 minutes, I'm going to focus on one task. So you're very, very task-oriented, very single-focused. You don't have to focus for too long. It's a great way to kind of keep the brain on task without getting distracted or exhausted.
It also kind of helps to time box it so that you know, I have this 20 minutes that I will dedicate solely to doing this one task. And 20 minutes seems to kind of map to our attention span for being able to focus on this sort of rote typing. So we would go away and work for 20 minutes, brainstorming audiences, however that process would work. And then we would come back together for 10 minutes and discuss all the brainstorming we had just done, look at our list, see if anything was really interesting or really strange, and kind of explain why it was there. And then go away and do that for another 20 minutes. If it ended up that first 20 minutes wasn't time to finish the task, then we would just move on to the next task. So if our next task was to combine like audiences, then we could go away and do that individually, come back together, discuss it, and then plan out the next meeting. So pretty much any work that involved a lot of that typing and filling in cells and spreadsheets, we use that 20 structure on, and we found that really, really effective.
Yeah, really productive. And again, a very nice way to get some of the positive aspects of brainstorming while guarding against some of the downsides. So a positive of brainstorming, you get various perspectives, you can generate a lot of information pretty quickly, but a downside is that you also kind of normalize, if you're together in a room and you're brainstorming, you bias each other. So this would split people apart to individually generate information, but then pull them back together to converse about it, to find the similarities and differences back together and potentially spark new ideas in the collaborative process.
Does that answer your question, or did you have any follow-ups about that structure?
Oh, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Awesome, no problem.
Are there any other questions?
Where did you say you were going to post the presentation?
So all the materials from this are posted on site.uci.edu/E16UCI/8. We'll also provide this information to the organizer of the webinar so that potentially this can get posted with the recording and other materials.
Yeah. We get a not secure message when you go to that site. Just FYI, there's probably a outdated certificate or something.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We will look. Funny. We're trying to do something sneaky and malicious, and you got us. Darn it.
This is it's a test, right?
A very elaborate trick. A small audience of people interested in IT change communication to click a link. All right. Any other questions? All right, well, it sounds like that may be about it. But again, our email addresses are on the screen, and we'd encourage you to reach out to either of us, both of us directly. You're more than welcome to do that. Eager to share information, beneficiaries of information at other campuses about their pilot projects and of info sessions and really help us pull together, so we are eager to do the same for others and help to big change management that you may be having where we can provide one. So thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it, and don't hesitate to reach out if you've got additional questions.